There is a book of unknown authorship that was written about 700 or so years ago in the medieval era by one of the Rishonim. The purpose of the book, interestingly, was to give teenagers something to do on Shabbos afternoon, which is an unusual premise for a Torah book, but that's the premise. And the author of the book took the 613 mitzvos. As we know, the Torah has 613 mitzvos, 248 performative, positive mitzvos, mitzvos aseh, 365 negative mitzvos, mitzvos los aseh, prohibitions, transgressions, and he organized them in the order in which they appear in the Torah. The Talmud tells us that there are 613 mitzvos. It does not delineate them. So we don't know from the Talmudic times exactly what is the breakdown of what's included as a mitzvah and what's a subcategory of another mitzvah. If you actually lay out the total number of mitzvahs, it's probably millions, because each one of those 613 is a category under the rubric of which there are many, many mitzvahs that are included. So what exactly constitutes a headline mitzvah? What's a subcategory of another mitzvah? That was not really addressed until the period of the Rishonim. And then you have the Rambam, who said, I'm going to undertake this mission. And he wrote a book where he outlined 14 parameters for what constitutes a headline mitzvah and what's not considered a headline mitzvah. And once he finishes the rules, he lists all the 613 mitzvos by order of importance. Which one is most central to living a religious Jewish life and moving on from the top on downward. So mitzvah number 1 is to believe in God. And mitzvah number 2 is that there's only one God. And mitzvah number 3 is to love God, and so on. These are obviously the most important mitzvahs because they get to the center, to the core, to the epicenter of our religion. The book that we are talking about today is known as the Sefer HaChinuch, the book of education. And what he does, he takes the mitzvos of the Rambam and he organizes them not by order of importance, but by order in which they appear in the Torah. So the first chapter of the Torah, Genesis chapter 1, has the mitzvah to procreate, pru urevu, to be fruitful and multiply. So that's number 1. It's not number 1 in Rambam's list that's organized by order of importance, but it's number 1 in the chronology of the Torah. And number 2 is circumcision. And number 3 is not to eat from the did hanasha, from the sciatic nerve. Those are the only 3 mitzvos in the book of Genesis. And then it proceeds to the book of Exodus and Leviticus and Bamidbar, Numbers, and of course, Devarim. And what he does is he gives a little bit of a snapshot, an overview of every mitzvah. What is the definition of the mitzvah? What are some of the laws and applications of the mitzvah? What are some of the reasons behind it? What are some of the interesting questions that are debated about it, discussed about it, addressed about it in the literature, and the applicability of these mitzvahs that is applied to men, to women, to a Kohen, to a Levite, in modern times, in the times of the temple, Messianic times, and so on. What are the repercussions? That is the objective of the book, and it's organized, again, in the order of the Torah. And the idea is Shabbos afternoon, it's a long day, and you want to kick back and do some light reading. You can read about the mitzvos of this week's parasha, or you want to just read them in order. It gives you like a nice little survey, nice little overview, a snapshot of the 613 mitzvos. Now, this book has an introduction. And in this introduction, the author of the book, we don't know exactly who it is. We know his name. His name is Rabbi Aaron the Levite. We don't know exactly who it is. There is a debate about that. But he gives an overview, not of the mitzvos, but of our faith, our religion, our philosophy, the principles of our philosophy. And what I wanted to do with y'all today is to go through this introduction. I don't think we can cover it in its entirety, but I find it to be very interesting and very important and crucial and critical. It's always important to understand more and more about our philosophy and the bedrocks of our philosophy. So let's take a closer look at the introduction of the Sefer HaChinuch, of this wonderful book, a book written for teenagers, but also for people like us. And let's look at what he says about the foundations of our religion. And he starts off with a truth, a clear truth, a truth that is accepted by humanity. And that is to believe witnesses. Someone comes and gives testimony. We don't know what happened. We don't know who's guilty, who's innocent. What were the terms of the agreement? The court is ignorant to the events being discussed, being debated, being adjudicated. They have to assemble evidence. They have to compile reasons to rule one way or the other. And one of the most important methods that they use is testimony, is edus anashim, testimony of people. This is a truth. He starts off the introduction. It's a truth that is clear, that is accepted by humanity. We believe witnesses. Now, the relevance of this to the foundations of our religion, it's not quite clear. We'll get to that in just a little bit. But this idea to believe people, we know people could lie. We're familiar with that possibility. So how come when witnesses come to court, their word is accepted? Maybe they're lying. Maybe there's deception involved. Maybe there's perjury. Who's to say they're telling the truth? It's a good question. But nevertheless, it's an accepted principle. It's an accepted practice amongst humanity to believe witnesses. And then he elaborates. Let's talk more about this idea, this principle that we believe witnesses. The more witnesses, the more believability. When you have more people testifying to a given event, to a given truth, you don't know what happened. But the more witnesses, that increases the veracity and the believability of the message. When there are more people testifying to a given matter, then it becomes more true in the eyes of those who hear that testimony. And when there are fewer testifiers, witnesses to a given event, then someone who's wise and discerning will have maybe a bit doubt. I don't know how much we could trust one person, maybe even two people, maybe even three people. But obviously, when you have more people, 5 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 and so on, as you have more witnesses, you have more believability. But still, this is what he says, it became widespread amongst the practices of humanity that we would even punish someone based upon testimony. And we would even execute someone for a capital offense based upon the testimony of 2 witnesses or 3. And if there are 3 witnesses, all the more so. We believe 3 more than we believe 2. And that's by humanity at large, and that is affirmed by the Torah. The verse tells us, Al pi shnayim edim, with 2 witnesses or with 3 witnesses, the person guilty of a capital crime will be executed. Even in the Torah, we have this idea that 2 witnesses are believed, but there is more belief accorded to 3. This is how he introduces a concept that will provide a very, very strong backing to one of the foundational principles of our faith. In addition, this is the next part of this introduction. Everyone agrees, based upon the principle of believability of witnesses, we accept from our fathers and from our grandfathers and from our elders their testimony in what they tell over that happened in their day, or in the days of their fathers, or the days of their grandfathers. What the Sefer HaChinuch here in his introduction is trying to get to, he's trying to get to the essence of believing things that you yourself did not witness, you were not privy to. If I see something, I'm pretty convinced that it's true. I witnessed it with my own eyes. I heard it with my own ears. How do I know what happened in the 1950s? or the 1940s, or the 1850s, or the 1500s. We know we believe that there was something called the Vietnam War, and there was a president named Richard Milhous Nixon, a favorite of ours. We believe in the World War II. We know that happened. What's the mechanism? How do we know that that's true? We didn't see it. We weren't perhaps even alive at that time. This is the exact same mechanism to know about anything that happened to our forefathers in previous generations. My father tells me, this happened. I saw it. Well, there's the principle. We believe people when they tell us things. I have the privilege of teaching teenagers a few times a week. And I told them, I said, y'all were born in like 2007 or 2008. But you certainly heard of the 9/11 attacks. You heard of it. I'm sure you read about it. You understand what happened. But you weren't alive at the time. I was. I remember it. I could share my story. In our neighborhood, we have people that lived in New York City at the time and who witnessed it. And you bring them all into the room, they'll all tell you the exact same story. So you could be very confident, even though you weren't even alive at the time, you could be very, very, very confident that this happened based upon the principle we believe witnesses. And again, the more witnesses, the better. And the more confident we can be in the reliability of the message. This is his introduction to a concept. How do we know about what happened in the past? There's a chain, and the chain relies on testimony and on witnesses. And the more witnesses, the better. And we can be very confident in the events of the past based upon this principle of testimony. Here's the punchline. Therefore, when God wanted to give the Torah to his nation Israel, how did he do it? So if you watch the movie, you may think, well, he gave it to Moshe. He revealed himself to Moshe. And then Moshe went and conveyed that message to the nation. And it's very important to not make that mistake, because if one person claims something, maybe they're telling the truth, maybe they're lying. But the reliability is very weak. And we wouldn't change our whole lives based upon the testimony of one person. If there's a man who claims to be a prophet and claims that the angel Gabriel appeared to him and taught him a version of the will of God, or gave him golden tablets and translated the ancient Egyptian for him, are they telling the truth or are they lying? We don't know. But it's not very persuasive, and maybe you wouldn't want to, hang your hat on this and commit your whole life to this, because after all, humans, we know that they have the capacity to lie. It is possible. And one person making such a claim, we wouldn't execute a person in court with only one witness, because maybe they're lying. We need a minimum of 2. But 3 is even better. And you know what's even better than 3? 5 or 5,000 or 500,000. When the Almighty gave the Torah to the Jewish people, he gave it to them in front of 600,000 adult men. And there was a corresponding amount of adult female, we imagine. We don't know the exact number of how many females there were, but we imagine that it was roughly comparable. Well, if you add 600,000 to 600,000, you end up with 1.2 million people. And that doesn't include people that are younger than the age of 20. So that pushes the number certainly past 1.5 million people. And every single one of them witnessed the most incredible event, the most important, significant, and transformative event in all of human history. Why did the Almighty not give the Torah to Moshe? It's simpler. It's simpler. It's neater. Moshe, you're a great guy, you're a prophet, here's the Torah, go tell the Jewish people about that. Well, the Almighty gave the Torah, he didn't do it in that way. Because you know what? If we were clever and sharp, we would say, wait a minute, Moshe, how do we know you're not pulling our leg? How do we know you're telling us the truth? Maybe you're a fraud. Maybe this is all a hoax. And that is a responsible question to ask. Moshe is telling us, if someone lights a match on Shabbos, we execute him. Well, wait, are we really going to listen to that? Maybe Moshe is a fraud. Maybe he is lying. In order to dispel that and to make it clear to everyone that this is legitimate, the Almighty did something unprecedented. He revealed himself to a nation of millions of people, and they all survived to tell the tale and to perpetuate it to their children and to their grandchildren and to their great-grandchildren and so on. Until today, we know for sure this event happened. There are more eyewitnesses to this event, most likely to basically any other event in history. There's no event that has as much reliability, as many eyewitnesses as this one. Continues the Sefer HaChinuch. In order to make sure that the truth will be so secure and reliable and unquestionable and incontrovertible and unshakable, the people were elevated temporarily to the state of prophets. They were given a state of consciousness, a state of clarity, a state of absolute focus and consciousness that is unparalleled and unrivaled by anything else in order to eliminate any doubt and uncertainty. What a person experiences with prophecy is so absolutely clear, they don't question it. They never ask, well, did I hear that right? Are you sure? What, say that again? No, it's 1,000% clarity. A state of focus and consciousness unrivaled, unmatched by anything else. So we have an event here that completely changes everything. We have an event here where a whole nation, 600,000 adult men, plus a corresponding amount of women, plus children, that all of them experienced it, not just experienced it on a regular level, on the highest level of consciousness, and they live to tell the tale. There are more witnesses to this event than any other that I could think of off the top of my head. And that's why, in the run-up to the Sinai Revelation in chapter 19 of the book of Exodus, God tells what's going to happen. He tells Moshe, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. He outlines the plan for the Sinai Revelation and for the pronouncement of the 10 Commandments. And he says, behold, I will come to you in the thickness of the cloud. Why? Ba'avur yishma ha'am bedabri imach, so that the nation hears when I speak to you. Normally, God spoke to Moshe, and that's a prophecy. We can't hear that. It's not, unless you're a prophet as well, you can't possibly tap into that conversation because it's a message of God. And only if you're a prophet could you possibly absorb that. But here, God is saying, I'm going to speak to you, but I want the nation to hear as well. Why? So they hear when I speak to you, they'll believe in you forever. The reason why we believe in Moshe, the reason why our antecedents believed in Moshe, the reason why our nation forever believed in Moshe, and believed in the concept of prophecy, and in the primacy of the prophecy of Moshe, it's because of this event. A whole nation experienced prophecy. Together in unison, they heard God speaking to Moshe. They never again had a doubt that prophecy is real. Moshe is the desired prophet of God, and he is going to be the bearer of the details of the Torah. We heard the Ten Commandments directly. The details, we know Moshe is verified as a legitimate prophet. We could hear that from Moshe. So this is, I think, a very powerful argument to get this book, or the introduction of this book, started, to just observe the fact that nothing that he said is really arguable. He just laid out, well, we believe witnesses. 2 people tell you something, you believe it. 3, even better. 1,000, even better. 10,000, 100,000. If you have 100,000 people in a stadium and they all testify that this is what happened in the stadium, that is what happened in that stadium. Because there's no way to coordinate with such a large group of people. You can make a conspiracy that large. 1 person, you can hold a secret. 2, maybe. It's harder. 10, very hard. 100, basically impossible. 100,000, completely impossible. 1,000,000, it's likelier that Abraham Lincoln didn't exist and the Civil War never happened. And George Washington is a myth made up by a school teacher. Someone made up the school teacher. There was a person the United States was really invented in the 1850s or 1870s. And the whole backstory was just added in. All that detail. There was a man, there was a war. The Brits were actually never here. They were never here. It was all made up. And this whole thing about the tea and the tea stamps and all that, the Whiskey Rebellion, all that was made up post facto. The Constitutional Convention. It's a story. It's a story. It's like a fairy tale. It's a myth. It's the founding myth. It's like the Romulus and Regulus story of America. It's made up. Clever. They got together. The elders of America got together and made up this whole backstory. They made up this guy, Andrew. Let's make up this guy, Andrew Jackson. The swashbuckling president from Tennessee. Oh, that's great. Let's add in, the short guy, the Manifest Destiny, James Madison. We'll throw in this other guy, Henry Harrison, whatever his name is. He died only a month into his term. All made up. All made up. And then we'll talk about this guy, Abraham Lincoln. Oh, that will be a classic. Let's make that guy up. Let's make that. It's just people in the studio. In the writer's room. They concocted all these characters. And they just made it up. That could be true, right? Is there anything that we know for sure that contests that hypothesis? But we know, think about how many people you have to get to go with it. Think about how many people have to lie and perpetuate the lie to their children for that to be true. It's absurd. It's impossible. It's not true. We could be very confident that George Washington exists. Now, did he chop down the cherry tree? We don't really have a lot of testimony to that. That part maybe is not true. But that there were wars that thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of people died in. Civil War, 700,000 Americans died on both sides if you tally them together? That's not something you can make up. We have an event here. It's not possible to make up. And it is noteworthy that no other religion has this founding story, has this founding narrative. Isn't that interesting? I always like to say there's at least 1 billion people in the world that are completely, categorically wrong, for sure. At least. Because the Christians and the Muslims are not compatible. Okay? These are different religions. They're not compatible. So if the Christians are right, well, you have 1 billion plus Muslims that are wrong. And then if the Muslims are right, we have 1 billion plus Christians that are wrong. And those are mutually exclusive. They can't both be right. So we know for sure that there's at least 1 billion people that are living lives and beliefs that are totally, totally false. At least. Now, the truth is, of course, they're both wrong. But Those are two very large religions that have their founding stories, and none of them have a story with 600,000 people, adult males, and a corresponding amount of females, and hundreds of thousands of children, and this why not? If you were to found a religion, wouldn't it be grander and more powerful? Think about that oomph of the story. God appeared to all of us. It wasn't just me in my little cave or me in some mountain in upstate New York. All of us, thousands, tens, hundreds of all of us. Wouldn't that be a more powerful way to found your religion? Why? We know at least one of these two religions is false. We know that for sure. Some enterprising religion founder should have made up that story. And the reason why we don't have those stories is because those stories are impossible to get off the ground. You can't get 1,000 people to go with your made-up story, and certainly not to perpetuate it to their children. This is how this introduction begins. And then he proceeds and says, if not for the fact that the nation experienced the Ten Commandments with prophecy, it wouldn't quite have that same convincing veracity. Yes, there were countless miracles. Think about the 10 miracles in Egypt. The Jew drinks water from a thermos, and the Egyptian sticks his straw in and sucks out blood. And there's darkness, palpable darkness for the Egyptians, and the Jews have light. And every single Egyptian family has at least one dead. And amongst the Jews, even the dogs are not barking. These are all powerful miracles, be very persuasive if we witness them. And they were accomplished without taking the whole nation and making them into prophets. There's a need here to take a whole nation and make them into prophets. Why? Says the Sefer HaChinuch, in all the signs that Moshe did before Pharaoh and before the eyes of the very eyes of the nation, there was still a little bit of room for a person to challenge these miracles. Maybe, just maybe, Moshe is the greatest sorcerer of them all. He's David Blaine mixed with David Copperfield, mixed with that mentalist Uri guy, whatever his name is. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's using some sorcery, some advanced black magic, some sort of mechanism by which I don't know how he's doing it, but it's some sort of trick. And yes, Moshe went into the land of sorcerers, and the Egyptian sorcerers were able to basically match him tit for tat until they reached the third plague. They also took their staffs and threw it on the ground, turned into serpents, and then converted water to blood and were able to conjure frogs. When it got to the third of the 10 plagues, that of lice, they said, sorry, we can't do it. It's the finger of God. So that, perhaps you may say, may prove the supremacy of Moshe. After all, even the fellow sorcerer said this is the handiwork of God. So why is that not enough? Why does everyone need to be made into prophets? Don't we know already with the Exodus that Moshe is legitimate? This is the handiwork of God, not the handiwork of Moshe? Nevertheless, if someone really wants to be stubborn, I'll say, listen, Moshe wasn't really acting as an implement of God. He was just cleverer than them. He did the sorcery better than they did. Maybe there's still a little wiggle room for someone to be recalcitrant and intransigent and to not believe in Moshe and in his standing as a prophet. But once the whole nation, they experience prophecy, there's not a single bit of doubt. And they know for sure that everything that was done as per the will of God. And from the hand of God, all these events happened. And they saw with their eyes, and they knew with absolute clarity, and they testified to their children that every single word of Torah, from the first letter of Genesis, the Beis of Bereshis, until the last letter of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, the Lamed of Le'enei Kol Yisrael, it's all true, it's all clear, without any doubt in the world. And their children testify that to their children, and so on, their children, to their children, until our times, writes the Sefer HaChinuch 700 years ago, and we could add until our times, in modern day, 21st century. The bottom line, the result is, our Torah is Torah's emes, is true. And we have 600,000 reliable witnesses. And that's a very important number because that includes the grand total of all different possibilities of people, which is a little added thing he adds over there. The totality, you can only have 600,000 opinions in any matter. It's not possible to have any more. This is a Kabbalistic idea that he throws in. This is the totality of human diversity. And that's not including the women and the children. That's an added bonus. And he proceeds. And if someone who is trying to get our hearts to deviate away from God, if there is someone who's trying to incite us to become heretics, and they say to us, why, oh Jew, why do we listen to you and to your tradition? Why are you asking your father and your grandfather? Why is that the way to determine what happened in the past? You should use the scientific method. You should investigate and ponder with your mind and with your reason and with your logic. Open up your eyes and see what's in your world. Look at the galaxies and the different forces of nature. And that will bring you towards wisdom. Use your intellect. Use your powers of deduction. Why is it so important for you to go back to your tradition? This is an interesting thing. He's saying that the way we know is because of tradition and the testimony and the system and the mechanism of testimony. But now he's responding to the critic who may say, that's not the proper way to arrive at truth. A better way is to use your mind and your deductive capacities. We respond, says the Sefer HaChinuch. We respond to him. We cannot arrive with our powers of deduction and investigation. We cannot achieve any bit of faith at all. It makes you wonder, we know that Abraham didn't have prophecy. And he didn't have the Sinai experience to fall back upon. And he, nevertheless, arrived at all the truths and all the realities of faith on his own. Well, what did he use? He used his mind and he used his deductive capacities. He used the world, the handiwork of God, to arrive at that truth. Nevertheless, Sefer HaChinuch is saying we have a way better system. It's possible that, Abraham is the exception that proves the rule. Abraham is the one outlier, but that's not really the best method for us. Why not? Because even in this world, in the matters of this world, all the Chachmei HaTeva, all the scientists, they can never reach the end. You ask someone who's a researcher, PhD, which used to mean a lot more than it does today, okay? 100 years ago, PhD was a serious credential. Today, they're giving it out a lot easier. But you ask someone who's a researcher, who's a scientist, how much of, the systems of the world, do we actually know everything about it? What percentage of the brain do we understand? All the mechanisms, all the functions. This is written 700 years ago, and he's saying the secrets and the mysteries of all the different parts of nature. And he lists here, it's like the grasses and the trees and the fruits and the stones and the precious stones and the mechanism of magnetism. All the great minds have pondered and studied, and all the scientists have measured and analyzed and discussed, and they haven't reached the end. We too, if we want to find the truth in the greatest pursuit, in the pursuit of God, let's not challenge God. God himself tells us that the way to do it is the way that he did it. To give over this experience to people who would then transmit it to their children. And our fathers of blessed memory, they set the table for us. And they asked the deep questions. And they arrived at the true knowledge and the end of that true knowledge, thanks to this event. And they determined and they recognized to know that God speaks to men and they live. Why should we question that? Why should we challenge that? Why should we investigate that? Why should we pursue that? Their words are true. And they gave it to us. And we should just drink their words thirstily as they were written, as they were transmitted. And then he proceeds with a parable. Someone who thousands, so millions of people said, don't drink from this stream of water, because anyone who drinks from it dies. And people tried it 1,000 times, over 1,000 different points in history, and different people from different lands, and they all drank from it, and they all died. And then there's some sort of hoity-toity, fancy, credentialed physician says, don't believe it. It's a bunch of nonsense. I prove it. I measured it. I brought it to the lab, the water. These waters won't kill you. They're clean water, and they're healthy, and they're good. Drink. You have nothing to worry about. Are we going to abandon the millions of witnesses to the death that this water brings in favor of the physician, the researcher, the scientist? Of course, we won't do that. This is exactly the same idea that we mentioned, says the Sefer HaChinuch. The truth borne out by the testimony of the masses is more reliable, is more trustworthy than that the scientists and the researchers reveal with their mind and their intellect and their investigation. I would add, how many, this is just me talking now, how many of our very well-developed scientific truths were later withdrawn and were revealed to be actually not true. And the numbers were a bit fudged. The amount of retractions, but it's all peer-reviewed, right? Yeah, but the amount of retractions of peer-reviewed studies is astronomical. Tens of thousands. I think that's per year, actually. It's an enormous amount of quote-unquote rigorous science that turns out is a bunch of baloney. We know for sure that George Washington existed. And if someone were to come and say, I did a study and I proved it conclusively, it's all fake, it's still true. The reliability of testimony and transmission from generation to generation is actually more reliable than the cleverest of researchers. And therefore, the best way is that a person performs all the words of the Torah that was given to us initially in front of millions of witnesses. God gave it to our people, and we know that that's true, and there's millions of people that witnessed it, and they transmitted it to us today. And included in this Torah is every precious bit of knowledge and every glorious bit of wisdom. This is the first part of the Sefer HaChinuch's introduction to his book. And his point is that the Torah is true. And he expresses this based on the idea that, well, testimony is believable. More witnesses who testify, well, that's even more believable. Witnesses who saw something so clearly, that's even more reliable. And that's a better system of determining the veracity and reliability of a given matter than investigation. And thus, we could be very confident that our Torah is legit. It came from Almighty God. And this is the only one, again, the only religion that has this origin story. Yes, there were miracles that Moshe did that were unmatched by any sorcerer, any guru, any soothsayer, any one of Pharaoh's henchmen. They threw up their hands and they said, this is the hand of God. This is the finger of God. This is beyond us. This is not the byproduct of sorcery. But nevertheless, we got it absolutely clearly. The highest level of truth. We got it from God directly with millions of people to witness it, and they perpetuated it to us today. We can still know with as much confidence the Torah that we have from the beginning to the end is 100% legitimate. There's a very famous essay of the Ramban, the last comment in the Ramban's commentary on Parshas Bo. So this is chapter 13 of the book of Exodus. Towards the end, but it's the last verse in the Parsha. And he writes how much of our religion, tons of mitzvos and festivals, they're all based upon the Exodus. And there's a mitzvah to remember the Exodus and never forget it. And we remind ourselves of the Exodus in the morning and at night. And we have a whole day, a whole really festival, the festival of Passover, to remember it, to relive it. And really all festivals are zecher liyetzias Mitzrayim, are a remembrance for the Exodus. Why is it so important to remember the events of the past, the events of antiquity? And the answer that he gives is because this event gave us everything that we need to know about faith. It proved the existence of God, the absolute power of God. He has complete power. He is omnipotent. The fact that God cares. He interacts with us. He hears our prayers. And he's able to do miracles as easily as what we call nature. Nature is not nature. It's just the will of God that's most common. A suspension of nature is just as easy for God as what we call nature. And God doesn't do this all the time. He does it once, or he did it once, and that is sufficient. But if we forget about that event, and all the events really that surround it, from the Exodus all the way to Mount Sinai, and to the events of Mount Sinai, maybe even for 40 years, we're eating manna for 40 years. I always love to challenge people who question the legitimacy, the veracity of the Torah. Well, how do you explain that a nation of millions of people were duped into thinking that they were eating manna from heaven that dropped 6 days a week and 2 portions on Friday? Like, how do you persuade people, even if they're gullible and naive and weak-minded, how do you persuade them that they ate manna for 40 years? Oh, and they drank water that came out of a rock, and perpetuate the story to their children? How do you do that? But besides for that, of course, the apex is the Sinai experience. The entire nation heard God directly and lived. And the Torah itself challenges us. Go find another religion like this. Is there anyone that makes this claim? The fact that the claim exists is proof that the events are true. The Torah is true. This is the beginning of the introduction of the Sefer HaChinuch to his work. I hope to continue because then he proceeds and says, well, okay, why do we have Torah? And he goes on to address other foundational questions of our faith and our philosophy. But if we're going to try to understand more and more about our religion and our faith and our philosophy, I think this is a very important essay or a very important citation to study. And he began with the most important event, the Sinai Revelation. A nation of millions experience prophecy, hear God directly, and live to tell the tale, and still tell the tale to us today. We heard it from our parents, who heard it from their parents, and we perpetuate it to our children, and we live by the lessons of the Torah and make sure that we are compliant with the laws of the Torah and the values of the Torah, and of course, the glorious destiny that the Torah is urging us to go fulfill. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I hope to continue the next, but we'll do it like another session to finish out this wonderful introduction of the Sefer HaChinuch to his wonderful book, where he guides us and directs us and offers us more insight into other areas of our philosophy. Again, the email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.